Good evening, my night historians. Welcome to tonight's episode of the Boring History for Sleep. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight, we'll quietly wander through the marble halls and candle corridors of medieval Rome to explore the curious lives of a few scandalous popes. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from tonight? You can let me know in the comments. And now, are you ready for rest? Take a deep breath. Get cozy. Let the weight of the day melt away. And let's begin. Let us drift back to the year 897 in the heart of medieval Rome, a city of faded grandeur and flickering candlelight where the ruins of emperors cast long shadows over the lives of popes. Rome in the 9th century was not the grand imperial city it had once been. The marble temples had crumbled, repurposed stone by stone into churches, homes, and strongholds. Narrow streets twisted through the remnants of ancient forums. The Tiber River flowed quietly, winding past basilicas and bell towers, as if trying to remember the days when it had mirrored the world's greatest empire. But though the empire had waned, power still pulsed through the city. Power not of emperors, but of popes. And yet even the papacy in these years was unstable. Very unstable. Between 872 and 965, a span of less than a century, over 20 different popes would come and go. Many would die suddenly. Some were deposed. Others were murdered. Papal elections were often less about piety than politics, dominated by Roman noble families and rival claimants to the imperial throne. It was in this world, uncertain and turbulent, that the strange trial of a dead pope would unfold. But to understand the cadaver sin, we must first meet the man at the center of it all, Pope Formosus. Formosus, whose name means handsome in Latin, was born in Ostia near the sea. He was a respected churchman and had served as Bishop of Porus. Over time, his influence grew. He traveled as a papal legate to Bulgaria and gained a reputation as a skilled diplomat and administrator. But his rise was not without controversy. During the reign of Pope John VIII, Formosus fell into political conflict. He was excommunicated in 876 for allegedly inciting rebellion and abandoning his bishopric. Later, under Pope Marinus I, he was reconciled and restored to favor. In 891, Formosus himself was elected pope. His time as pontiff was marked by deep political turmoil. At the heart of it was a power struggle over the imperial crown of the Holy Roman Empire. Formosus supported Arnold of Carinthia, a Frankish king, over the reigning emperor, Lambert of Spalato. This choice would have consequences beyond the grave. In 896, Formosus died likely of natural causes. He was buried in the traditional papal vestments, laid to rest in a marble tomb in St. Peter's Basilica. His death, however, did not end the animosities that surrounded him. After Formosus's death, the papacy passed briefly through the hands of Boniface VI, who reigned for just 2 weeks before dying, possibly deposed or poisoned. Though sources differ, he was succeeded by Pope Stephen VI, a man whose reign would become infamous for what followed. Stephen was a member of the skeleton faction aligned with the family of the late Emperor Lambert, whom Formosus had opposed. Whether driven by personal conviction or pressured by Lambert and his mother, Agiltrude, Stephen made a fateful decision. He would put his predecessor Formosus on trial. In January 897, Pope Stephen VI convened what has come to be known as the Cadaver Sin Synotus Horrend in Latin. It was an ecclesiastical trial, but unlike any before or since, the accused was already dead. Formosus's body was exhumed from its tomb nearly a year after burial. It was dressed in papal robes with the papal tiara placed upon its skull. The corpse was seated on a throne in the Basilica of St. John Lewin, the official cathedral of the Bishop of Rome. A deacon was appointed to speak on behalf of the deceased to answer questions and defend him. Stephen presided surrounded by bishops and clergy. The charges included usurping the papacy while still Bishop of Porus, a violation of canon law, breaking his oath to remain in one see, violating church protocol. The dead pope did not respond. The deacon, speaking for him, could do little. The trial proceeded. Eyewitnesses say Pope Stephen grew angry, shouting at the corpse as if it could answer. Others watched in silence, stunned. Whether they feared or supported the act, no one interrupted. Eventually, the court declared Formosus guilty. His election was ruled invalid, and all of his ordinations and appointments were annulled, which affected dozens, perhaps hundreds of priests and bishops. For Moses' papacy was officially erased. What followed was even more macabre. His body was stripped of its sacred vestments. 3 fingers of his right hand, those used for blessing, were cut off as a symbolic punishment. His remains were re-buried in a porpoise grave, then dug up again days later and thrown into the Tiber River. If the goal had been to destroy Formosus's legacy, the result was the opposite. The Roman people, already weary of chaos, were horrified. A sense of unease spread through the city. Whispers turned to shouts. Riots broke out. Even those who disliked Formosus could not stomach the desecration of a corpse. Within months, Pope Stephen VI was imprisoned. Soon after, he was strangled to death in his cell, a quiet, shadowed end to a noisy life. His enemies took control of the city. The cadaver sin had ended not only for Moses' dignity, but Stephen's papacy as well. Shortly after a new pope, Theodore II convened a synod that declared the cadaver sin invalid. Formosus's body was recovered from the river and reburied with honor in St. Peter's. His ordinations were restored. Later, Pope John IX went further, banning trials of dead persons altogether. A law that unsurprisingly has never needed to be revisited. Looking back, the cadaver sin seems almost unthinkable, a symbol of the chaos and politicization that plagued the medieval papacy. But it was also a turning point. From the ashes of that scandal, the Church began to rethink how it chose its leaders and how far it would go in settling scores. Tonight, we leave behind the candle-lit throne and the voices echoing through the Lateran Basilica. The storm has passed. The basilica is silent once more. The flickering lamps fade, and Rome, ever ancient, sleeps. The past, even its strangest moments, always settles, and in the stillness, we remember. The world keeps turning, and even the wildest chapters of history find their close. The moon hung low over Rome, its pale light dusting the crumbling ruins of the Forum and casting long shadows through the narrow, twisting alleys of the eternal city. The year was 94, and the papacy, once the moral heart of Christendom, had become something else entirely. A throne contested by noble families, political warlords, and in this peculiar moment of history, a powerful Roman matron who ruled not by crown or sword, but through her influence behind palace walls. This was the age some would later call the Saeculum Obscurum, the dark age of the papacy. Others, less politely, would name it the pornocracy, the rule of women, specifically one woman, Theodora, and even more so her daughter Marozia. But our story tonight begins not with them, but with a man, Sergius, a Roman aristocrat with sharp features, a noble name, and a deep ambition. He would become Pope Sergius III, and his reign would mark the beginning of one of the most scandalous eras in papal history. And yet, like all strange stories, this one begins with a moment of silence. In the early 900s, Rome was barely a city. It was still the center of the Christian world. Yes, but its glory days was centuries gone. The Colosseum was crumbling. The imperial palaces on Palatine Hill stood abandoned, their marble columns chipped and overgrown. Wild dogs roamed the ruins at night, and yet within this decay, power still flickered, centered not in the fading emperor, but in the pope. The problem was, popes weren't lasting very long. In the span of just a few years, the papal throne changed hands more than a dozen times, often violently. Rival factions, noble Roman families, soldiers, imperial envoys, all fought for control. In this chaos, the papacy had become a prize, and whoever claimed it also claimed control over Rome's lands, wealth, and authority. Sergius had first risen to attention many years earlier. He was a nobleman by birth with backing from the powerful Tusculani family. In 898, he nearly became pope, but the election went to John IX, a more moderate candidate. Sergius was exiled from Rome, biding his time in the south, gathering support and waiting. His time came in 94 after a storm of papal assassinations, depositions, and power plays. The reigning Pope Christopher was deposed, possibly murdered, and Sergius returned at the head of a military force. With the backing of Alberic I of Spalato, a powerful nobleman and Theodora's husband, Sergius took the papal throne by force. He was not elected by peaceful consensus. He seized the tiara, and his papacy would become the foundation of a decade shaped by family intrigue, whispered scandals, and quiet manipulation from behind silk curtains. Sergius may have worn the white robes, But according to later chroniclers, it was Theodora and her daughter Marozia who held the true power in Rome. Theodora was no ordinary noblewoman. She was politically astute, connected to Rome's elite, and had the loyalty of important military figures. Her daughter Marozia would become even more influential, clever, beautiful, and ruthlessly pragmatic. They would use marriages, alliances, and quiet coercion to shape the papacy for decades. And here, rumor enters our story. According to the 10th century historian Lutrand of Cremona, a sharp-tongued cleric with a gift for drama, Sergius III began a romantic relationship with Marozia, who was possibly still a teenager at the time. Leotrand claimed that their union produced a son, a boy who would later become Pope John XI. Now we must be careful. Lutrand was not an impartial source. He was writing years later and disliked the Roman aristocracy. Modern scholars debate his claims, and it's possible the story of Sergius and Marozia's affair was exaggerated or invented entirely. But the rumor once born would become part of the Church's strange legacy. True or not, Marozia did rise to become one of the most powerful figures in Rome, and Sergius ruled unchallenged for 7 years, a long reign by medieval standards. Sergius III's papacy was not just colored by whispers of scandal, it was also marked by assertiveness and reform. One of his first acts was to annul the ordinations of his long-dead rival, Formosus. This meant that any bishop appointed by Formosus, including those who had themselves ordained priests, was invalid in Sergius's eyes. It created chaos in the hierarchy and reopened wounds thought, long buried. Sergius even restored the decisions of the Cade of Ascend, reversing the decisions of his immediate predecessors. Yet for all this drama, his rule also brought a strange kind of stability. He rebuilt parts of the city, he repaired St. John Lyran, the Cathedral of Rome, he issued new laws to bring discipline to the clergy, and he remained pope until his death in 911. Not murdered or exiled, but passing quietly after a long tenure. That alone made him unusual for the time. With Sergius's death, the throne passed to others, but his influence and that of Marozia only grew. Marozia would later marry powerful nobles, raise her son to the papacy, and even declare herself senatrix of Rome. She ruled the city not by decree, but through dynastic power. Her descendants, the Tusculan popes, would dominate the Vatican for decades. And all of it began in these quiet, smoky chambers during Sergius' reign. This period, where papal power was effectively controlled by one noble family, and the women behind it became known to later historians as the pornocracy, or rule of the harlots. It's an unfair name in many ways, tinged with misogyny and rumor, but it speaks to the shock later chroniclers felt at how political and personal the papacy had become. The year was 955, and Rome, though still steeped in sacred relics and ancient memory, had become a city not of saints and martyrs, but of families. Families who ruled not by divine right, but by bloodlines and backroom bargains. Among the most powerful of these was the Crescent, an aristocratic house whose wealth and influence extended across palaces, monasteries, and even the papal throne itself. And it was into this world, equal parts spiritual and secular, that a young man named Octavianus was born. He was no ordinary Roman youth. His father, Albert II of Sepolato, ruled Rome not as pope but as princes. The self-declared prince of the Romans, a secular strongman who held the true reins of the city. Albert had no use for emperors in far-off Germany, nor for rival popes imposed by distant powers. He ruled Rome like a private estate, and before his death, he made one final strategic move. He arranged for his own son to become pope. In 955, at the age of only 18, Octavian was elected Pope John XII, the youngest pope in recorded history. He had no priestly experience, no spiritual training, no theological writings to his name, but he had blood, the right blood. And in a time when the papacy had become the crown jewel of Roman aristocracy, that was enough. So began one of the most controversial papacies in church history. Historians have often debated how much of what followed was true and how much was embellished by political enemies. But from the earliest accounts, a picture emerges, one that is difficult to dismiss entirely. John XII, still a teenager when he assumed the throne of St. Peter, quickly became known not for preaching, but for pleasure. Chroniclers of the time, such as Luprand of Cremona, described the Laran Palace, the official papal residence, not as a center of prayer and diplomacy, but as a place of feasts, gambling, and whispered trysts. Lutran, no friend of John, accused him of turning the palace into a brothel, claiming he shared his bed with noble women, widows, and even his own niece. Though these stories, like many from that period, are difficult to verify and may reflect political motives, what is clearer is that John the XII ruled with little restraint, indulging his youth and his position in equal measure. He made questionable appointments, including ordaining deacons in horse stables and naming unqualified allies to bishoprics. He was said to have toasted to the devil during dice games and invoked pagan gods during drunken celebrations. And yet this same young pope held real political power and faced real political threats. In the wider world, the Holy Roman Empire was stirring again. Its new ruler Otto of Germany had ambitions to be crowned emperor in the ancient tradition by the Pope himself. In Rome, it was a rite that echoed back to Charlemagne and Constantine, a sacred fusion of altar and sword. John the XII agreed to crown Otto in 962 with solemn ceremony. He placed the imperial crown upon the German king's head. The Basilica of St. Peter echoed with Latin hymns. For a moment, the unity of Christendom seemed restored, but alliances made in gold and incense often proved fragile. No sooner had Otto returned to Germany than John began conspiring against him, sending secret letters to Otto's enemies. Among them, Berenger of Alva, a rival claimant to the Italian throne. Whether John feared imperial control or simply disliked being overshadowed, we cannot say. But Otto learned of the betrayal and he returned. In 963, Otto marched on Rome with his army. The citizens, weary of Jay's behavior, did not resist. The Pope fled, some say on horseback, others say disguised as a beggar, leaving behind a city on the edge of revolt. Otto convened a Synod, a formal ecclesiastical trial to investigate John's conduct. The charges were scandalous even for the time. Simony, blasphemy, murder, perjury, adultery, incest. Some may have been true, others inflated. Still, John refused to appear. He sent a message warning that any clergy who dared condemn him would be excommunicated. The Synod proceeded without him. He was deposed in absentia. In his place, the bishops selected Leo VII, a layman who had to be ordained on the spot just to wear the papal crown. But Rome had not yet seen the end of John the XII in a swift and sudden counterstroke. The young pope returned to the city just months later, supported by armed allies and a loyalist faction of Roman nobles. Leo VII was forced to flee. Those who had voted to remove John were punished harshly, mutilated, exiled, or killed. John retook the papal throne, and once again, chaos ruled Rome. It did not last long. In May of 964, John the XII died suddenly, and under circumstances as strange as his life. The most famous version of the story claims that he suffered a fatal stroke during an adulterous encounter. Though, as with much of his papacy, fact and legend are blurred. Others say he fell ill. Regardless, he died at the age of only 25. He had ruled for nearly 9 years. In that short time, he had crowned an emperor, betrayed an empire, fled his city, returned by force, and left behind a legacy so notorious that church reformers centuries later would still cite his name with dismay. But even in scandal, there is history, and even in failure, there are lessons. John the XII's reign, chaotic, indulgent, and divisive, became a rallying cry for those who longed for a better church. In time, it helped inspire reforms from the Gregorian reforms of the 11th century to the College of Cardinals, designed to keep secular hands from choosing popes. And so, the memory of a reckless boy pope shaped the future in ways he likely never imagined. Now, as we leave behind the flickering torchlight of 10th century Rome, the grand halls of the Lateran fall silent once more. The throne of St. Peter, for all its gold and glory, waits for its next occupant. And we quiet observers in the night, remember that history is made not only by the virtuous, but also sometimes by the ones who lost their way. Let the candles dim, let the stones rest, let the city sleep again. And so do we. In the rolling hills just outside medieval Rome, where olive groves shimmer in the afternoon sun and noble villas dotted the countryside, the powerful counts of Tusculum held quiet dominion. Their roots ran deep in the soil of Latium. For generations, they had produced not only local lords, but popes, and they had no intention of stopping. It was into this world of inherited privilege and quiet ambition that a young nobleman named Theophylactus was born. We do not know the exact year of his birth, perhaps 1012, perhaps a little later, but we know that he came from a family of extraordinary influence. His father, Albert III, was the Count of Tusculum and already the father of two popes. The Tusculum family had made the Vatican their backyard, using it to advance their wealth and status. So it came as no surprise when sometime around the year 32, the young Theophylactus was elevated to the papal throne. He was still a teenager, likely around 20 years old, though some chroniclers claim he was even younger. He took the name Pope Benedict IX, and with that began one of the most unusual and controversial papacies in all of history. Benedict IX had no significant ecclesiastical experience. He was neither a theologian nor a spiritual leader. He was simply a Tusculan, and that was enough. His election was secured by bribery and influence, a common practice in the 11th century, especially under the thumb of Roman noble families. The church at this point was not the universal spiritual authority it aspired to be. It was a prize, and the Tusculans had paid well to keep it. From the beginning, Benedict IX's conduct raised eyebrows. Chroniclers accused him of violence, immorality, and lavish living. Even his allies in the Curia seemed to lose patience. St. Peter Damian, a reform-minded monk of the time, described Benedict's papacy as a disgrace to the chair of St. Peter. Other accounts, perhaps exaggerated by hostile reformers, accused him of simony selling church offices, dishonorable behavior, and acts unbefitting any clergyman, let alone the Bishop of Rome. Still, Benedict IX remained in office for over a decade. From 1032 to 1044, he reigned in Rome, aided by his family's political muscle and the loyalty of the Tusculan faction. The papacy became a court of nobles, and Rome simmered with discontent. Eventually, that simmer boiled over. In 1044, a popular uprising broke out in Rome. Whether it was the result of political infighting, public outrage, or rival noble factions, we cannot say for certain. But Benedict IX was driven from the city. In his place, the reform-minded faction installed a new pope, Sylvester III, a bishop from the Sabine Hills. Sylvester's election was contested from the beginning. Benedict, though exiled, never officially abdicated. Less than a year later, Benedict returned, expelled Sylvester, and reclaimed the papacy. The city once again was his. But something had changed. Benedict, now in his early 30s, seemed restless, perhaps tired of the role, perhaps bored, perhaps still entangled in personal matters. Whatever the reason, in 1045, just 1 year after regaining the throne, Benedict did something no pope before him had ever done. He sold the papacy. Yes, sold it. To his godfather, Giovanni Gratian, a respected priest known for his integrity and learning. Benedict agreed to step down, not entirely freely and not without persuasion, in exchange for a large sum of money. Giovanni took the name Pope Gregory VI. His intention, according to some, was noble, to rescue the church from scandal. But the transaction itself was seen as simony, the very crime reformers condemned. Benedict IX, now freed from the burdens of papal office, disappeared into the countryside. Some sources claim he wished to marry, though the woman's name is lost. Others suggest he sought only a quieter life, but his retirement would not last. In 1046, Pope Gregory VI faced pressure for the way he had acquired the papal title. At the Council of Sutri, summoned by the newly crowned German King Henry III, Gregory resigned, acknowledging the taint of simony. Meanwhile, Sylvester III, still lurking in the background, was also dismissed. This left a vacuum, and Benedict saw his chance. In 1046, Pope Gregory VI faced pressure for the way he had acquired the papal title. At the Council of Sutri, summoned by the newly crowned German King Henry III, Gregory resigned, acknowledging the taint of simony. Meanwhile, Sylvester III, still lurking in the background, was also dismissed. This left a vacuum, and Benedict saw his chance. He returned once again to Rome in 1047 and for a third time claimed the papacy. The citizens were stunned. So was the clergy. But this time, Benedict's return was short-lived. Henry III had no intention of letting Rome fall back into the hands of its turbulent nobles. In 1048, the king dispatched a German bishop, Bruno of Egem, who took the name Pope Leo IX. He was a true reformer, and with him came the future of the church. Benedict IX was expelled from the city once and for all. He faded from history not long after. Some say he lived until 1056, dying in obscurity. Others suggest he returned to his family estate near Tusculum, never again entering public life. He remains the only pope in history to have served 3 separate terms. He is also one of the only men ever to sell the papacy, a transaction so shocking that even centuries later, church councils would still invoke his name as a warning. Was he evil as his critics claim? Was he simply young, poorly prepared, and drawn into a system of corruption too powerful for any individual to resist? The truth, as always in history, lies somewhere between fact and myth. What is certain is that his tumultuous career became a turning point. The chaos of his reign and that of his contemporaries gave rise to the Gregorian reform movement, which sought to remove papal elections from the hands of noble families and restore dignity to the office. It was the beginning of a new era, but that era was born from the ashes of the old. Tonight we remember Benedict IX not as a hero nor as a villain, but as a figure from a distant, complicated world. A young man, perhaps too young, handed the keys to Christendom and undone by the very power he was born into. The palace is quiet now. The hills of Tusculum sleep beneath the stars, and the bells of Rome toll softly, as if calling time to rest for us and for those long gone. It was the dawn of a new century, the 14th century, and Europe stood on the edge of enormous change. Kingdoms rose and fell in tangled alliances. Wealth flowed through Italian city-states. Gothic cathedrals stretched toward the heavens. But beneath the grand architecture and shimmering court rituals, something deeper stirred, a growing tension between sacred authority and royal ambition. And into this shifting world stepped a man named Bertrand de Gaulle, an intelligent, careful, and perhaps reluctant figure. He was not Italian, he was French, a Gascon from Bordeaux, born into the quiet elegance of southwestern France. And in the year 1305, he became Pope Clement V, the first pope in over 300 years not to be crowned in Rome. His election would mark the beginning of one of the most controversial and consequential periods in church history, the Aignan papacy, also known to later historians as the Babylonian captivity of the papacy. But to understand how this moment came to be, we must first understand the man behind it and the king who shaped him. The papal throne had been empty for nearly a year. After the death of Benedict XI, the cardinals had gathered in the Italian town of Perugia, but politics divided them. The Italian cardinals favored one candidate, the French another. Days turned into weeks. The conclave stalled, and then in a quiet compromise, a name emerged. Bertrand d'Aut, the Archbishop of Bordeaux. He was not present at the conclave. He was not even a cardinal. But he was known to King Philip IV of France, and more importantly, he was trusted. Philip IV, called Philip the Fair, was a shrewd and commanding monarch. His rule over France had brought him into repeated conflict with the church, particularly with Clement's predecessor, Boniface VIII, who had declared in no uncertain terms that the Pope held supremacy over all kings. Their feud had ended with Boniface's arrest and death, an episode still fresh in everyone's memory. Philip needed a more pliable pontiff. Bertrand, quiet and diplomatic, fit the role. But even before Bertrand could become pope, there were conditions. According to several chroniclers, Philip sent him a list of secret promises, demands to support French interests, to absolve those involved in Boniface's humiliation, and most fatefully, to look favorably upon Philip's growing desire to dismantle the once powerful Knights Templar. Whether Bertrand agreed to all these terms or only some, we cannot say for certain. But what is clear is that after his election on June 5, 1300, Pope Clement V was not crowned in Rome. Instead, his coronation took place in Lyon, France, and he never set foot in Rome as pope. The papacy was, in theory, a Roman office. For centuries, the Bishop of Rome had lived and ruled in the city of saints and martyrs. But Clement found Rome unstable, torn by noble rivalries, riddled with factional violence. The city was chaotic, the politics deadly. Instead, Clement chose to settle in Aignan, a small city just across the Rhine River from French territory, technically part of the Kingdom of Naples, but heavily influenced by the French crown. At first, it seemed a temporary arrangement. Clement spoke of returning to Rome eventually, but as the years passed, the papal court grew comfortable in Avignon. The climate was gentle, the streets were orderly, and the reach of King Philip IV was never far away. By the time of Clement's death in 1314, the papacy had effectively left Rome behind. Over the next 70 years, 7 consecutive popes would rule from Avignon. They built a lavish palace, La Pala de Papes, and the city transformed from a quiet riverside town into the administrative and spiritual hub of Europe. But not everyone approved. To critics, particularly in Italy, the Avignon papacy was a betrayal, a papacy in exile, a church captive to the French crown. The great poet Petro, writing decades later, called it the Babylonian captivity of the church, likening the papacy's time in Avignon to the Jewish exile in ancient Babylon, and there were reasons for concern. The Avignon popes were often seen as too close to the French monarchy, too willing to intervene in secular affairs. They levied taxes, sold indulgences, and expanded the bureaucracy of the church to unprecedented levels. The Vatican, some said, had become a court of lawyers and accountants rather than shepherds of the faithful. Even as they presided over Christendom, the popes of Avignon rarely ventured far from the walls of their palace. But for all its criticisms, the Avignon papacy was not entirely a decline. Clement V and his successors streamlined church administration, organized canon law, and enhanced diplomatic networks. They dispatched envoys to distant kingdoms, negotiated with emperors, and oversaw missionary activity in Asia and Africa. Still, Clement's legacy was burdened by one enormous decision: the suppression of the Knights Templar. The Knights Templar had once been heroes of Christendom, crusaders, bankers, and protectors of pilgrims in the Holy Land. But by the early 14th century, their power had become inconvenient. Philip IV, deeply in debt to the Templars, sought to destroy them. In 1307, he ordered the arrest of Templars across France. Dozens were tortured and forced to confess to heresy, blasphemy, and bizarre rituals. The Pope, Clement V, was caught in the middle. He had not ordered the arrest, and he protested at first, but under pressure and with the confessions, however dubious, piling up, Clement convened a church council. In 1312, at the Council of Vienne, Pope Clement formally suppressed the Templar order, not because their guilt was proven, but in the interest of peace and unity. Their lands were seized, their leaders were executed, and one of the greatest military orders of the medieval world vanished almost overnight. To some, it was justice. To others, betrayal. Clement never saw the fallout. He died 2 years later in 1314, not long after the burning of Jacques de Mar, the last Grand Master of the Templars, who it was said cursed both Clement and Philip from the flames. Whether curse or coincidence, both men died soon after. Pope Clement V's papacy was a paradox. He was a careful, quiet leader devoted to the smooth running of the church. He reorganized the curer, strengthened papal administration, and handled diplomacy with skill. Yet, he also presided over one of the most politicized eras in church history, moved the papacy out of Rome, and helped bring down an entire order of knights. The Avignon papacy, which he began, would one day lead to the Great Western Schism, a time when multiple rival popes claimed authority at once, and Europe itself divided over which one to follow. In trying to avoid the chaos of Rome, Clement had unknowingly planted the seeds of even greater discord. But tonight, the streets of Avignon are silent. The rain flows gently past stone bridges. The bells of the great palace no longer toll. The Pope who left Rome has long since passed into history, and the church he left behind, bruised, burdened, but enduring, would one day return to the city of its saints. The candles flicker. The wind softens. The pages of history turn quietly. And you, dear listener, may rest knowing that even in the strangest corners of the past, peace can be found. Sleep well. Music, 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 music. Back to top AI features. Feedback: transform your transcript with AI-powered insights. Output language: AI responses will be in this language: English, Spanish, Español, French, Français, German, Deutsch, Italian, Italiano, Portuguese, Portuguese, Dutch, Netherlands, Russian, Ruski, Japanese, Ribanyu, Korean, Hangugyo, Chinese, Zhongwen, Arabic, Alarbia, Hindi, Hindi, Polish, Polski, Swedish, Svenska, Norwegian, Norsk, Danish, Dansk, Finnish, Suomi, Czech, Czechtina, Hungarian, Magyar, Greek, Ellinica, Hebrew, Brit, Turkish, Turkcha, Vietnamese, Tieng Viet, Thai, Athi, Indonesian, Bahasa Indonesia, Malay, Bahasa Malayu, Ukrainian, Ukrainska, Romanian, Romana, Bulgarian, Bulgarski, Croatian, under Hrvatsky, Serbian, Srpski, Slovak, Slovenčina, Lithuanian, Lietuviu, Latvian, Latviešubam, Estonian, and Eesti. Most used. Your top 5 features based on usage. No favorites yet. Start using features and your top 5 will appear here automatically. Try a summary popular features viral clips. Find shareable moments, long summary. Comprehensive overview. Key insights. Main takeaways. Notable quotes. Memorable phrases. Basic content summaries and transcripts. Clean transcript, micro summary, short summary, bullet points, long summary, key insights, notable quotes. Analysis, deep insights and patterns. Extract ideas, extract insights, extract patterns, extract wisdom study and education. Learning and note-taking tools. Flashcards, concept map, Q&A, outline notes, Cornell, notes, rapid logging, T-note, method, charting, method, QEC, method, Q&A, split pages, content creation, social media, and blog, viral clips, Twitter, ideas, LinkedIn, article, Twitter, thread blog, on article to blog, outlines, tweet, ideas, LinkedIn, post, Twitter, thread, full, specialized advanced analysis tools, speaker, IDI, checker predictions, references, Mayan idea, proper notes, generated content, power the outputs from your transcript. Clear. All click any AI tool above to generate content here. Finding this tool useful? Bookmark us, CMD plus T TRL plus D, for easy and fast access. Bookmark this silly lil tool? Looks like you found the transcript you needed. Before you head off, did you know you can bookmark our site? Just click the star. On the top bar, use this keyboard shortcut to bookmark us. Control plus D. Use this keyboard shortcut to bookmark us, CMD plus D. That way, next time you need a transcript, you can find us easily without searching again. Super handy, right? Close disclaimer. YouTube2transcript.com is an independent service and is not associated or affiliated with YouTube or Google. Any brand names or logos displayed on this site are used for illustrative purposes only and do not imply endorsement or partnership. Read the rest of the disclaimer here. Oops, something went wrong. It seems our consent manager, CMP, couldn't load properly. To ensure you have the best experience on our site, please consider disabling your ad blocker or adjusting your browser's privacy settings to allow the loading of our cookie consent manager and Google Tag Manager. Many features of this site may not work as intended until you do so. Close transcript copied to clipboard. We designed Recapio to be the best way to consume YouTube videos. Create instant AI summaries for any YouTube video, generate key takeaways, chapters, and shareable notes. Dive deeper with Q&A after you get the summary. Try Recapio free. Close. Summarize on Recapio free. Oops, you found a cool feature. You stumbled on a feature that needs you to be logged in. Don't worry, it's super quick and easy. Log in or sign up with Google or Sign. Create account.